Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. How are you this morning, Kieran?
It's a glorious sunny morning. I'm irritatingly cheerful.
Yeah, the glorious sunny morning is a value judgment, Kieran, which we'll pass over. It's questions day, Kieran, and my question is, how does one stop taking the Olympics so seriously? Honestly, we're recording this on Monday. Ali went up to Edinburgh on Saturday, and the first few days of chaos up there, it's all technical rehearsals and running around, setting up props and stuff, so it's very difficult for her to get to call me. And she found a short window to phone me yesterday, and I said, "You have to phone me back, darling. Our girl's going in the K1 kayak slalom." I don't know what those words mean, Kieran. I seriously don't know what those words. Ali didn't phone me back, and she showed no interest in the fact that we got an unexpected bronze medal, but I was dancing around the room. And then when Adam Peaty, I couldn't bear to look. It's like Palace had lost in the last seconds. It's a nightmare. Anyway.
Baroness was crying.
Well, she
was, especially when he started talking to the camera to Sharon Davis. He was brilliant. And she got all emotional.
His interview afterwards was just incredible. That's proper Olympic spirit, unlike the Argentinian kids kicking Morocco all over the pitch and diving. No, Adam Peaty was great, but and then it's just so annoying, the tabloids, because Adam Peaty mentioned yesterday that he woke up with a sore throat and did this whole thing about how he would have lost anyway. And then the two of the tabloids going, Peaty blamed sore throat for defeat. It's like, leave him alone. It's the Olympics. We've got some good questions today, Kieran, including one potential way of getting around FFP, which is possibly borderline illegal. We'll come to that here. Our first question comes from a Swindon Town fan, Thomas Goldfinch. Strong name. And Thomas Goldfinch says, Swindon Town fan, frequent listener to the pod. I don't think you've covered it, says Thomas, but if you listened all the time, rather than just frequently, Thomas, you'd know. But I wondered what you know about the county ground purchase. I understand it was a joint venture between the club and the Supporters Trust. Can you explain exactly how it was funded? It's been a strange, volatile time for Swindon in the last couple of years, Kieran, because when we started the pod, they were in a poor situation, and then a couple of years after that, it looked like they'd been saved by decent people, and now it's up in the air again, isn't it, a little bit at Swindon?
They're not in a great position. There's vultures circulating, and not nice ones. I'm sure there are nice vultures, but these ones aren't. I've never thought, sort of to character assassinate a particular species of bird before. As far as the stadium issue is concerned, I think sort of for the benefit of non-Swindon fans as much as anybody else, here's the full story. There was a fan of Swindon called Nigel Eady, and he gifted the club and the foundation around about £3 million and set up a trust. And the trust did a really good job at protecting the club from, I'm going to name him, Lee Power, the former owner, whose interests in Swindon Town were more along the lines of what's best for Lee Power. So what happened was that the trust, around about 18 months ago, was in a position to buy the stadium from the local council and then ensure the freehold was held 50% by the club and 50% by the supporters club via a new company. So this is a way of preventing the club from, or a club owner, from potentially trying to sell off the stadium for retail development, for housing, or Swindon's an attractive place from a property developer's point of view. This is one of the issues we've always had. Now, what happens is that they've now got a 250-year lease, which is good. It can allow opportunities to enhance the stadium. The club is paying rent at, I think it's £100,000 a year, which is half of the previous rent. And the rent is paid to the trust, who then reinvest that money to make improvements. So, this is a nice circularity. This particular agreement, my understanding, there was a lot of meetings between the council, the trust and the club and so on, but it does seem that things have moved forwards. And what now happens is that the trust and the club meet on a monthly basis to discuss the management of the stadium and plans to develop it. Now, there's only one slight sort of fly in the ointment. I think they are committed to spending £1 million over the course of the next 18 months. And if they fail to do that, the council have the option to buy the ground back. So it's quite a complicated position. But at present, the trust are sort of looking after, they are sort of the custodians. They've got to invest money. I think that money can be invested potentially. And if that is the case, then the great thing from the perspective of Swindon Town's fans is that the county ground will be held for the benefit of the club and the fans for years to come. And the supporters trust and the Nigel Eady trustees are working for the benefit of the football club as being part of the community. And also, from what I understand, there's been some really good people whose names I won't mention, but they know who they are, who have done work for nothing on behalf of the club or behalf of the fans to try to ensure that the protection, which I think was one of the things we were concerned about, is maintained. That's separate to the ongoing issues in terms of the ownership of the club. I think Glenn Morfuni, who's the current owner, the Australian owner, it's not been as he envisaged. I think he's bitten off more than he can chew. And I've had people from prospective ownership groups get in contact with me to say X, Y, and Z. And I'll always sort of just try to be honest, say, these are the state of the finances. This is where we are. If I'm asked what I think the club is worth, I'll give them an answer. And I know that my numbers are substantially lower than the asking price at present.
I'll tell you who did it for vultures, Kieran. I mean, people for centuries probably went on having no feelings about vultures either way until Walt Disney came along. Those two vultures in Snow White, I mean, they never recovered from that. They're the most terrifying birds in animation. This is a phrase I wasn't expecting to hear. This question, Kieran, of long lease, we spoke to Tim Williams, CEO of Oxford, last week, and he's talking about their potential new stadium, which would be on a lease of many hundreds of years. Are there any downsides to a lease? Because, I mean, ostensibly, as Tim says, you are kind of buying the ground if you've got a lease for that long, but are there any negatives in something like that?
I think the only negative can be if the landlord has the right for a rent review, say every 7 years, and can put up that rent substantially, and then things can get unpleasant. But as we've seen with West Ham, they've got a 250-year lease at the London Stadium, and that works very much for the benefit of the club. There is a limit to how much extra they can potentially pay. And whilst we've probably laboured a point, from the club's point of view, it's a fantastic deal. But the landlord's point of view, and from the taxpayers and ratepayers in London point of view, probably not such a good one. But it's been signed, so I think it can be a long-term lease. Anybody that's renting an apartment or has leasehold property, and you're down to the last 50 to 60 years of the lease, you realise that things can start to get a little bit awkward, because why invest in developing the property when potentially you're looking at a wasting asset?
Our next question comes from Colm Sheenan, Kieran, and it's our weekly "How do we get round FFP" question. I think we might need a little theme tune just to play in for our weekly. It's a little sting, so listeners know what's coming up. I love the way Colm has phrased this. Colm says, I have yet another hypothetical way in which certain clubs might circumvent FFP regulations, but I wonder if it would be possible and or allowed. So he's already put himself on the back foot, because not only does he not know whether it can be done, he doesn't know whether it's legal or not, which makes you think it might be doable. It seems fairly straightforward to me, Kieran, and perhaps possible and allowable. What if Ronaldo decided he wanted to play in Europe again, or the Champions League, and so Al Nassr decided to loan him to Newcastle, for example, for a season and pay all his wages? Perhaps Benzema, Neymar or Mahrez could follow in the same way. Would Newcastle be able to simply say that these deals are costing nothing to them and pass FFP without a worry?
I think potentially yes, and this is one of the unintended consequences of the multi-club ownership model. I go back to our very good friends at Udinese and Watford. If we take a look at Hassan Kamara, I think he joined Watford in January 23, was their player of the season, despite only being there for a few months. He was then sold to Udinese, who happens to be owned by the same family as Watford, for around about £18 million. Watford banked a big profit and then loaned back to Watford. Now, we don't know what proportion of his wages are being paid by Watford and what proportion are being paid by Udinese. But there are many examples of loan arrangements in respect of players where the club utilising the player is only paying a fraction of the wages. Romelu Lukaku, for example, for the past 2 seasons, he's been at Roma. Last season, I can assure you, Roma were not paying 100% of his wages. I remember Wayne Bridge when he came to Brighton. Brighton were paying 10% of his wages, but he's under contract at Manchester City, and he just wanted to play football. Allowed him to play football. Allowed him to go to sleep in the playoff final, Palace. I'm still bitter about it, 11 years, of course. And as a result of that, the player wins. Manchester City get a player who's not going to be first team off their books. Brighton get the utilisation of a Premier League player in the Championship. So if that can happen elsewhere, then there's no reason why it can't happen in an MCO. What I would expect to take place, however, if that these type of transactions started to occur, then there would be a vote of Premier League executives whereby such transactions had to be approved by a council, some sort of organisation. We've already seen that effectively with associated party transaction rules. So it won't be impossible to get it through, but it's becoming more difficult because clubs who don't like the MCO model are putting up greater and greater barriers.
I think it's a good sign, Kieran, in our attempt to wean you off having a go at Cucurella each week, that you're now having to go at a Brighton player from 11 years ago rather than one from last year. So that's a good sign, Kieran. Well done. You need to be congratulated for those small steps. Now, this question from Mark Goodchild, Kieran, is an area we have kind of explored specifically with Chelsea, but I'm happy to ask it again as a more general question because I think it's one that we need reminding of. Mark Goodchild says, as we all know, by the way, it's one of those names... I didn't help my Ali situation by phoning her up late last night saying, do we know somebody called Mark Goodchild? I was convinced I knew him. And Ali says, you're probably thinking of Mark Goodgie at Six Music. So that's... I think she went to bed quite humpty with me last night, Kieran, to be honest. Mark Goodchild said, as we all know, Chelsea are owned by venture capitalists. Will they have set a date for a return of their investment? And how much will they want back on their investment? So you can answer the specific Chelsea question, Kieran, but I think in terms of generalities, we all know Ipswich, for example, with pension funds. So it's an interesting one to know whether clubs will have dates and limits on their investment.
I think we look at it from a generic position to begin with. The increased interest by private equity, venture capital, vulture capital, pension funds and so on is linked to their investment portfolio. And if you've got a broad range of investments, you're looking for a short-term return on some, medium return on others, and others, final set where you think it's a long time punt. And I suspect as far as football is concerned, it probably comes into that final category. If we take a look at the success that FSG have had with Liverpool, it took them 10 years. The Glazers have been very successful with Manchester United, but it's taken a long time for them to really get a return on their negligible investment. In the case of Chelsea, I think once again, they are looking for a long-term return. If you look at the comments made by Jose E. Feliciano, because whilst all of the targeted comments are levelled at Todd Bowley, my understanding is that actually he has very little to do in terms of the running of the club. He's very much sort of front of house, sort of the target for comments and ad libs and so on. But Clearlake Capital, who are the venture capital company who own 60% of Chelsea, they are very much the focal point in terms of the investment. They've said, or Feliciano has said, is that the objective is to turn Chelsea into a £1 billion a year club in terms of revenue generation. Now, we've just seen that take place with Real Madrid. And Real Madrid have got a magnificent stadium. Real Madrid are, in my view, probably number one, if not, certainly top 2 or 3 football brands on the planet. They've got huge investment in infrastructure. They've got diversification into other sports as well. And they've just hit the 1 billion figure. Chelsea have got a 41,000 capacity stadium. So that they're not going to achieve it with the Stamford Bridge that we have at present. So in terms of getting that return on investment, what they need to do, first of all, is to look at alternative income streams. So something needs to happen with the stadium. But I think the other thing which was interesting in terms of Chelsea is that the owners are very, very bullish with regards to the growth of the women's team. And if that happens, rising tide lifts all ships. So, I think that could be very beneficial. They believe that, according to the comments, again, coming from the executives, is that the women's game can turn into I quote, a several $100 million a year business. I think that's perhaps a bit of wishful thinking, given that Chelsea's women's team had an £8 million a year turnover in 2023, and Chelsea are one of the most successful clubs in women's football. And our very good friend Swiss Ramble did a fantastic summary of the state of women's football last week on his Substack, and I think he's nailed it. That there are growth opportunities, but multiple growth opportunities in terms of increasing revenues by 10, 20, 30 times. I think that is perhaps a bit overambitious. So they are looking for a long-term return. Where's that going to come from? Again, looking at some of the comments, they are ambivalent about Super League. That means that they want it, but they don't want to be seen to be saying that they want it. With regards to matches taking place overseas, again, I think they're broadly in favour of that, but they have to tiptoe around the reaction from the fan base. They would like a smaller Premier League and more European matches. Again, all of these things are sensitive, and they're wondering how do they go about communicating that to the Chelsea fan base and also the fans of other clubs without having a hostile reaction in a similar way to what arose in respect of Super League.
Kieran, Chelsea have just sold their women's team, haven't they? Oh, to themselves, so that's all right. That's fine, yeah. I think if the reports in today's tabloids are to be believed, which is always 50-50, Sadiq Khan may have wished he tiptoed around the idea of saying Arsenal and Tottenham should play in America, but we'll come on to that in our news pod, I imagine. Is that £1 billion figure at all feasible, Kieran, for Chelsea, considering the size of their stadium, or is that just kind of bullish, wishful thinking?
I think Chelsea have the fan base to fill a 60,000 capacity stadium. Now, whether that can be done on the footprint where we presently have Stamford Bridge, I don't know enough about the architectural issues there. I do know that Chelsea have some very wealthy neighbours who wouldn't want the noise of the stadium being created, and those very wealthy neighbours employ very, very expensive lawyers. So that's going to be a challenge for the football club. I don't think they can achieve it in Stamford Bridge unless you go down the route of let's have American-style pricing for sporting events. And this is an issue where we've had contact from quite a few supporters trusts and supporters organisations of Premier League clubs to say the prices are going up, they're targeting seniors, they're targeting young fans. When people are not renewing season tickets, they're then selling those off on a match-by-match basis because they're targeting the tourist market and so on. I think there is a direction of travel in terms of trying to increase matchday revenue, but to get from £500 million to £1 billion on that basis alone, I think would be challenging.
Well, you could always play half your games in America, Kieran. That's another one to explore. This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp Therapy Online. What are your self-care non-negotiables? When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever.
To paraphrase the Ruts, If you're in a rut, you've got to get out of it, out of it, out of it, out of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you need to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a registered therapist. Once you get started, you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge.
With almost 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/price today, that's all in big letters, to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/price. Ben Archer has our next question. And Ben Archer's based in Australia, and I'm really interested to hear your response to this, Kieran, because if this is true, I can only say that the Australian leagues are taking the mickey a little bit, because this seems very odd. Ben says it's just been revealed that according to the membership arrangement of our A-League, the organising body, the Australian professional leagues, take a 25% cut of any international transfer fee that a club receives for a player. There's also a 15% legal fee applied by the APL for transferring the player licence through FIFA, plus FIFA and the Asian Football Confederation apparently charge a 5% fee as well. Is this normal across other leagues where clubs only bank around 60% of the transfer fee, or are Australian clubs being price gouged? I mean, it does seem an awful lot here. If they're taking 25% cut of any international transfer fee.
Yeah, even the worst agent would not normally take that. I'm currently watching a series on Netflix about American boy bands, but Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, how they're not my type of music.
So I had a cup of tea to my mouth then, Kieran, and I had to put it down, so I was in danger of spluttering all over the laptop. Of course you are, Kieran. You're watching it for the financial background, aren't you, I imagine?
Yes, I am. About how their manager, first of all, put himself down as a member of the band and then charged them an agent's fee on top of that. So they ended up with no money whatsoever.
I just love the fact, Kieran, that everybody else, the Baroness will be watching that saying, can we have some more music? There's too much talk. And you're just going, let's have some tax stuff. Come on, forget the music. Get the agent guy back on. He's fascinating.
Exactly. This does seem a very high fee. Now, whether this is the Australian Professional League saying we are responsible for the development of the players in terms of their welfare, their academy progress and so on, and therefore we're taking as effectively as an exit fee cut. But it does seem very harsh. Ben mentions the 5% which is taken by FIFA. Now, this is purely in respect of international transfers. But what happens is that is a standard charge, but at least that money gets recirculated back into the game. So if you've got any international transfer, what happens is that any club that's involved in the development of a player between the ages of 12 and 21, they get that 5%. So if we take Michael Elise going to Bayern Munich, between the ages of 12 to 21, he played for Reading, Arsenal Academy, Chelsea Academy, Manchester City Academy. They will share in that 5% development fee, which actually I think is a good thing. But what it also means, I guess, is that they're trying to keep as many players in Australia as possible because they're discouraging international transfers, trying to maintain the quality of the A-League. From what I understand, the wages in the A-League are probably not enough to keep a talented player from wanting to try their luck in. Certainly, there's quite a few transfers to the Saudi Pro League, but other European leagues, and we've had Australian players, of course, come here in the UK as well.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Luke Pagliaro, and I hope it's some compensation to Luke that even with my limited financial knowledge, this seems to me like a really sensible question, which is normally the prelude for you telling me that I'm wrong. But Luke Pagliaro says, I've always wondered why the transfer of players with so many long instalment terms are not secured. With my mortgage, if I didn't pay, NatWest would take my house, and with car finance, it's the same. In case of non-payment in a situation of financial difficulty, perhaps more likely at a lower league level, I'm a Peterborough fan, says Luke, but think of Reading, Wigan, Southend, etc. Wouldn't it be better to agree, say, that if Chelsea didn't pay their instalment fee for Enzo Hernandez, his registration would transfer back to Benfica? I appreciate there would be some complicating factors. For example, the player would have to agree to this in their personal terms. And there may be factors about overseas players, homegrown players in squads, or the selling club not wanting the player back. But it does seem strange, Kieran, has it not occurred to me before that these huge amounts of money are floating about with no security at all?
Yeah, and in the case of Chelsea, they owe hundreds of millions in pounds in outstanding transfer fees. I'm going to do something which probably the first time I've ever done. I'm going to praise FIFA twice in the same show.
Twice?
Yeah, I think what they do in terms of the solidarity fees, I think that's very progressive. And FIFA effectively acts as a clearinghouse with regards to transfers. And therefore, if there is a transfer on an international basis between two clubs, then FIFA will get access to the terms and conditions. And if a buying club fails to make a payment on the due date, FIFA can then impose sanctions, and UEFA can do the same across a European perspective as well. So if you've got a player going from the Premier League to Turkey or going from Belgium to Portugal, and the buying club fails to make those due payments on the due dates, then they can be subject to a charge. And the consequences of that, you quite often see transfer bans, you could see penalties being charged, and the ultimate sanction, which FIFA have threatened to operate, is to ban individual clubs from participation in UEFA competition. So I absolutely understand where Luke is coming from, because based on my numbers, the Premier League just by itself owed over £2 billion in outstanding transfer fees at the end of 2023. And it only takes one club to have problems for there to be a significant ripple effect. And my concern has always been the fear of contagion under these circumstances. We do not want in football a replication of what happened in sort of the banking and financial markets in 2007, 2008, where one bank couldn't afford to pay money to another bank, which was then due to another. And we were very, very close to the collapse of the global banking system as we've historically known it. So at present, football is operating on a fingers crossed and on a trust basis. I think you've got to give credit to both UEFA and FIFA, is that they do police these things very, very carefully. And because clubs are aware of the potential punishments, it is very much a last resort that they will do in terms of not paying transfer fees in due time. But I think Sheffield United are subject to a sanction for their late payments on some transfers, and this was done domestically. So again, Premier League and the EFL working together in order to protect the integrity of that part of the financial system.
I'm getting slightly worried about this praise for FIFA, Kieran. Earlier today, we interviewed Maheta Malango, who's the head of the PFA. A really interesting interview, which we'll be bringing to you in a couple of weeks' time when we have a week off. One of the things in it, he had some quite good words to say about FIFA as well, even though the PFA are currently suing FIFA through the European Commission.
Yes, he was, I think, very, very honest and upfront in his comments. My observation of FIFA is that there are many, many people who are doing a fantastic job there. Some of the global programs that FIFA operate in terms of bringing football facilities. So, I know I remember FIFA's got 204 members, and I know that sort of places like Bhutan originally had something like 2 football pitches in the whole of the country and 6 balls, and getting money and checking that there's been an expansion and an opportunity because football is the world sport. It is the universal game. Getting facilities available for people has been applied extremely well. Not necessarily the biggest fan of Infantino, but I think sometimes you've got to separate, just as we separate football club from football club owners, you've got to separate the people who are effectively the boots on the ground at FIFA from some of the more self-serving people at the top.
You can watch our interviews on our YouTube channel, should you so wish. This is one of those interviews where I would recommend that you do watch, especially the bit where Maheta says he doesn't want Gianni Infantino to take the fact they're suing FIFA as a personal insult. There's the look on his face when he says it. I'm not an expert, Kieran, but other people may think the look on his face contradicted that a tad. Our next question comes from John in Cumbria. Now, John, I like the fact that John's obviously been listening and thinks, Kevin doesn't like it when people just put their first name. But I'm still not putting my surname, but I'll give him a clue by putting in Cumbria. All right, so John, there's no way we can track you. There's a lot of Johns in Cumbria, but I appreciate the effort, John. But John has a really interesting question, I think, Kieran, and it's one of those that I like so much. When you think I should have thought of this, but John says when a team makes a new tactical idea work on the pitch, other teams try to come up with a way to nullify it or reduce its effectiveness. Given that we all just about understand how Chelsea are going to justify their current spending levels, with reference to PNS, why on earth did Arsenal, Man United, and Chelsea give them a combined £170 million last summer? Is there any point trying to outsmart an opponent on the pitch if once they've painted themselves into a financial corner, you pay to let them out? Surely there are enough players available around the world and it should be easy to simply not buy or sell to Chelsea and stand back and watch them struggle and make ends meet, or struggle to make ends meet.
I think clubs taking advantage of financial stresses at other clubs is something that we've seen in football. It could be that Arsenal and Manchester United both felt that they were getting a bargain. I presume this is in relation to what Kai Havertz and Mason Mount in terms of the prices that they were being charged by Chelsea at the time. And therefore, they feel that perhaps they have taken advantage of those situations. My view on PSR is that I know enough very smart accountants and very smart lawyers that there will always be a new scheme, a new kid on the block in terms of something which will help to circumvent the rules. And we've seen that in respect of Chelsea in terms of selling properties to themselves, allegedly selling the women's team to themselves on the 28th of June, just before the 30th of June deadline. But only a cynic would say that those two dates are linked. And we've always stressed we're not a cynical show. So I can understand John's point of view. At the same perspective, if the manager stroke coach feels that those players are the best for the squad for the next season and they just happen to be signing from Chelsea, then you should pursue them, because otherwise I think you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, in the sense that you're not getting the best players for the best positions for your club, be it Arsenal or Manchester United, just to make Todd Bowley squirm. And in terms of people I'd like to see squirm, he's pretty high up on the list, along with Cucurella.
Well done. If I had a hat, I'd be taking it off. Damn, I meant to say, Kieran, that John in Cumbria had our anti-penultimate question, i.e. the question before the penultimate question. And I meant to say that because I've been saying for months the pre-penultimate question, and then we had a message on social media just 2 days ago saying, for the love of God, please will you stop saying pre-penultimate, because this particular person said he's OCD about the English language, and the phrase is anti-penultimate, not pre-penultimate. So I meant just for him. And now I've said pre-penultimate about 4 times, so he'll be even more cross. But from now on, it's the anti-penultimate question. And from now on, nobody uses impact as a verb. Okay? Let's make that clear. Including our penultimate question, which comes from Toby Anamashahan. Toby Anamashahan says, my question is in regards to the possibility of fans funding transfers. For example, if fans were to start a GoFundMe to sign Amrabat for Man United, and this amount reached £10 million, would the club be able to use that to purchase the player, or are there rules in place that stop this?
Fan engagement in terms of funding is allowed, certainly as far as League One and League Two is concerned. That would be deemed to be part of what we refer to as football fortune. And the way that football fortune works is that player sale profits, FA Cup runs, and money put in by owners in the form of shares rather than loans, plus any donations, go into this particular pot. And as far as football fortune is concerned, you can spend 100% of that on players. So this is one way, effectively crowdfunding. Now, as far as the Premier League is concerned, it would go into the PSR pot. So once again, you'd be able to get effectively 100% relief for doing so. Would there be issues when the player is then sold? It could be conditional, that a bit like a sell-on clause. If a fans group put £10 million into player X, then they're entitled to 20%, 30%, whatever it's going to be of the profit. So that could be part of a broader negotiation between the supporters' trust or this specific fundraising exercise and the club itself. So I think it's something which is viable. I know that Brighton did it way back in the 1990s, and also every time that player did play until he got sent off, there was that sense that he's our player. So it has taken place, and it's more likely to take place, if we're honest, at a lower league level.
My guess would be, though, Kieran, that for me to answer one of your points is that clubs, if fans were to approach a club with this generous offer, clubs are more likely to say, that's very, very nice of you, but can we put a clause in the contract to say that you don't get any money if we then sell him at a profit? Because that would make life much more easy for the club, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all part of a much broader negotiation framework. And of course, the other thing that the club has to say is that if you raise £10 million, that £10 million perhaps has to be transfer fee plus wages for 2 years, rather than because fans, I think, we become transfer junkies in recent years and months. And all of the focus, and we get a bit starry-eyed when there's a particular level of transfer fee, which is another reason why more and more clubs are becoming so reluctant to quote transfer fees as part of a deal, because they do feel that it's feeding a habit in terms of more money being spent is greater from our perspective as football fans, in terms of the self-validation that we get from supporting Club X or Club Y. So could it be done? Yes, but I think the club would be insistent to say it's up to, first of all, we choose the player, not you. So don't have a poll on social media as to who the player should be. I think Crawley tried that. And you can imagine the coach saying, look, I really do need a central midfield player, but they want some sexy winger. And we've got 3 wingers already, and I don't play with wingers. So I think you have to be very, very careful. But the central premise is one which has been adopted historically and can continue to be so.
Well, see, there's another problem, because if I were to contribute money towards buying a player for Palace, I'd want him to play every week. Even if we bought a terrible player with that money, you'd think, hang on a second, I've coughed up for him, I want to see him.
Yeah, there are unintended consequences to everything.
If you listen to our Maheta interview, the phrase unintended consequences is used in several situations. It had to be explained to me each time, but each time my eyebrows went up a little further. I really can't recommend this interview enough, except for the fact he's way too cool, Kieran. Way too, isn't he?
He's very, very cool dude.
It's a bakingly hot day. He's just sitting there looking... God, he's got that sort of Patrick Vieira coolness about him, and just speaks 5 languages. I was reminded when Vincent Kompany did a TV show that I worked on, League of Their Own, and James Corden happened to mention the fact that he spoke 3 languages, and Vincent Kompany just looked at the camera and went, 5, which is just got around. When you're cool enough to get a round of applause from an audience just for saying the number 5, then you're cool. Our last question, Kieran, isn't about football finance, but I'm happy to ask it anyway, because it's an important question for at least 10% of the listeners to this pod. And it comes from Nicholas Stanley. And Nicholas Stanley says, last season, there are a lot more green kits than in previous years. What are Kieran's thoughts on green kits? Because I've heard that green is a very difficult colour to see against the pitch for colourblind people.
I don't actually have an issue in terms of the green against the pitch, because it's no different for a fully colour vision person. Yeah, because you see green against green. The problem with green is that it's fairly mid-term in terms of tonal coloration. So for people that don't understand colour blindness, if you have a black to white tone, where you sort of divide it in sort of 100% black, 100% white, and then you go up by 10%. That's a lot of what we're seeing at the time. And green is probably in that 40, 50, 60%. So the issue that colourblind people have is that if you are playing against a team in red, you might as well not be there. So I've stopped watching Ireland versus Wales play rugby because they are identical as far as I'm concerned. And also they both wear white shorts.
Yeah.
So, the next thing you'd always look at are the shorts. I remember when Liverpool played Manchester United at Anfield a few seasons ago, when Manchester United had a mid-green away shirt. Liverpool are all in red, of course, and that really was a waste of space. So as far as issues in terms of the pitch is concerned, not a problem, because you've got a moving object against a static object, not a problem. But red and green, also, orange and yellow, they might as well be the same, or orange and red. Those are the types of problems that a colourblind person would have.
See, it is worth bearing in mind, Kieran, the fact that it becomes a football finance question, because as we've heard before, 8 to 10% of the population is virtually all males that are colourblind. But 8 to 10% of the population in any football ground who have paid a lot of money for a ticket can't watch the game properly. And also, I have to say, there was a couple of games at the end of last season, Kieran, Ed and I watched, Premier League games, where we both struggled to make out the kits, to the extent that one of them, after 15 minutes, Ed said, the ref's going to have to stop this game, because clearly it wasn't an issue on the pitch for the players, but it became almost impossible for us to work out which team were kicking which way, because they all had, both teams had a one-colour kit, and they were so similar, it was awkward to watch.
Yeah, light versus dark is a very, very simple solution when it comes to kits, and why clubs don't take that into consideration when they're choosing their away colours.
Yeah, because you can still have your fancy kit. You can have as fancy a kit as you want. Just make it a stronger colour, or bear in mind the team that you're playing against.
Absolutely, 100%.
Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter, X, and find us on the YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is coming out on paperback very shortly, you can find details on the same website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our news pod. We'll be looking at the Bordeaux story in some detail on that. Until then, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Thank you to everybody for listening to the show, for correcting our use of wording. Use the word wordage there, which is bound to get me on somebody's book. Yeah. We do genuinely appreciate it, and please continue to engage in that manner. There's other ways you can support the show. Patreon, you can get an advert-free version of the show. You could, however, give us a review, and it helps us in the charts. It helps us because potential guests, that's the first thing that they do, and they try to work out what this in-joke is. And so therefore, it doesn't matter what you actually say on the review. You could even say you would rather it was presented by Ben and John from the Port Vale Ale and Vale podcast, who kindly invited me onto their show the other night, who appear to know more about the Price of Football podcast than either of the two presenters. They were encyclopedic knowledge, and I think they might even have Uncle Terry's file from Scotland Yard. That was the level of detail that they had about my favourite uncle.
Yeah, that's worrying, isn't it? Yeah, I think that worries Ali sometimes. Sounds like a great podcast, Kieran. I wouldn't mind being invited onto that one myself, Kieran. One of us isn't quite as busy as you. I should be very cross if the next guest I have on is Findlay before they finally get to me. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.